That's one. The second part, though, is that like if you have these breakpoints in the program, and in particular associated with this trigger mechanism, where like, oh man, the trigger could be pulled, there could be a lack of compliance with this the statute here. If only there was some way for HHS, for Congress, for FDA to all come to the table and industry and figure out how do we make this work? If you have a person at the top of HHS who has plenty of congressional adherence, by the way, who comes in and says, we don't want to fix this. In fact, we think that them violating the trigger is a good thing, or we're going to take further actions to even exacerbate the trigger. All of that becomes incredibly problematic because you don't have a mechanism to actually fix this. It's just kind of a slow-moving train wreck of a disaster if you're a supporter, of course, of the Medufa agreement. And then on top...
Well, Alec, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it also leads to a question that pops into my head immediately is, well, who normally would pull the trigger here, so to speak? Is it normally industry going, we're not getting our return on investment here? It doesn't seem like we are, at least. Or is it normally the government?
Yeah, so each program has financial reports that come out, I believe, on a quarterly basis. From my conversations with FDA staff, they've made clear that there are people kind of associated with each user fee program that are kind of like the user fee program professional staff. They're in charge of monitoring the budget, monitoring the resource allocations, making sure the trains run on time. By the way, most of those staff were fired last week. Some of them are still there working on a short-term basis, on a voluntary basis. Like I spoke to a person last week who said, yeah, I got laid off. I'm still there making sure the trains run on time, because if I didn't have a chance to do a transition, this program would self-destruct, for lack of a better word, in a very short amount of time. So if you're ever like, hey, are these people at the FDA dedicated to what they do? They sure are, in my experience, even though you might not always agree with them. But the people who are in charge of kind of monitoring that are the budgetary staff there. And I think they, in consultation with, let's say, like CDRH Director Michelle Tarver, people from the FDA General Counsel's office, would collectively come together and say, here's the data, here's the statute, like, what do we do here? And normally it's we're on the right side of the statute. I think there has been one instance historically with the BSUFA program for biosimilars where FDA said that it had found that it had violated the trigger, and it resulted in it going back to industry. And I think it may have been like the last year of a user fee program. But that problem was the size of the BSUFA program is incredibly minuscule. So violating the trigger wasn't so much the FDA messed up as I think they did not adequately forecast the number of biosimilar applications they would receive that year. For larger, more established programs like PDUFA or Medufa, and even GDUFA now, the generics one, it's just in a much different state of maturity that is certainly leading to problems. And again, the conversations I had internally with FDA staff who were still internal were to the effect of Medufa was in bad shape even as of a couple weeks ago. Now with the actual layoffs, the actual allocation of staff, internal resources is leading to just some extraordinary concerns.
Well, Alec, this is all incredibly important, obviously, for our community to keep an eye out. We appreciate the report. I wanted to know, is there any reports coming out, or what do you think that we should be keeping an eye on moving forward?
There is just so many things to keep an eye on. For my AgencyIQ audience, what I'm really focused on right now is disruptions in the way that the FDA kind of works day to day. One of the ones that has really come up as a key source of concern among existing FDA or remaining FDA staff that I'm talking to is they fire their library staff. You're developing a new cardiovascular medical device, and you're going, hey, there's actually some great literature. We're referencing it in our application, and it says that we can do this. Ordinarily, an FDA reviewer is not going to be like, oh, I trust that you have accurately characterized this report. Guess I'll just go on with my day. No, they're going to go in and they're going to say, does the report, that literature actually support the claim that was made, or are there extenuating circumstances, or was it inaccurately characterized? Right
Interesting.
now, they can't do that. And I think that alone is going to result in some extraordinary bottlenecks for reviews. Now, what I've heard as well is right now, some staff have found some weird workaround where they can get access through like the NIH library, which still has access. But that's one of those just little things where you don't know how important something is until it's not working right. It's like if you really stub your pinky toe or have a cut on it, or you break it or something. I
Mhm.
spend 0% of my day thinking about the pinky toe on my foot until it's really hurt. And then with every single step that I take, it's causing me problems. So that's one big part.
Now
The
you
other,
wish you had some pinky toe change management, right?
exactly, some pinky toe standards for a splint. The other part as well is just watching the White House during the Biden administration, the Obama administration. I could almost safely ignore most of the things that the White House were doing because it was kind of hands off with the FDA. They went, you, FDA, are the experts in regulation. We'll handle some high level things for sure. Like there will be some executive orders or memos. The Trump administration right now is really, though, leveraging executive orders, the Office of Personnel Management, the Office of Management and Budget to kind of corral the regulatory agencies under its control into doing very specific things. And there are lots of efforts that are currently ongoing that are aimed at, say, slashing regulation, setting regulatory budgets, ensuring that for every one new regulation or guidance, 10 are actually removed from FDA's existing stock. And that really places very hard limits on the FDA's ability to put out its own guidance. What that may actually mean for AAMI could potentially be an opportunity because if the FDA is unable to put out its own guidance, its own standards, let's say, under some of what it's previously done on the 510(k) program on like what are some modern predicates, it may need to actually lean more heavily on third-party standards organizations through like a standards recognition process. Because if it can't put out a guidance, it still could say, I'm going to recognize in full or in part this additional standard that's out there. And we can use that as almost a surrogate guidance document. So
Right.
as we're looking at what's coming out of the White House, there's going to be some creative problem solving to get around some of the challenges that are just inherently going to be raised by both a downsizing of the FDA, a reduction in its authority, and in some cases as well, a lack of ability of the FDA to actually put out new regulations, either because the White House and its Office of Management and Budget is placing those limits, or in other cases because the courts have recently placed limits on that. So, like the Loper Bright decision out of the Supreme Court last year, which overturned the so-called Chevron deference to regulator standard, uh, that was recently the cause of the overturning of the FDA's laboratory developed test final rule. We could see other instances there. And then in other cases, the FDA, if it lacks resources or the ability to publish new guidance and other things, it could limit its ability to even implement some really big long planned initiatives that it has. And the one to me that really I think will resonate with the medical device community, you have this shift from 21 CFR 820, the quality system regulation, to the ISO 13485 standard. If you're
Right.
not able to publish guidance and you don't have your regulatory policy staff on board, or you don't have project managers to actually do stuff, or internal educators to actually train FDA staff on the differences between the QSR and the QMSR, how are you actually going to implement that regulatory changeover on time? I think the answer is they're not going to. So keeping an eye out on just the limitations that the FDA will be under, and then what that means for regulatory change management, for strategy, for filing decisions for medical device companies as well.
Well, Alec, this is hugely insightful. Thank you again for joining us today and just sharing your thoughts on this report. Again, the report will be in the description, but it's titled "Following Layoffs: The Future of FDA's User Fee Programs is in Extreme Jeopardy" by Politico's AgencyIQ. Alec Gaffney, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it, and we hope to hear more from you in the future.
Fantastic, Brian. Thanks so much for having me. And of course, if any of your Amy viewers have any questions, I'd invite them to reach out to me and I'll do my best to answer any further questions.
Beautiful. Thanks.